Hello and welcome. My name's Rob Chisholm at Free Flight Brighton, and I've been asked by a few people to explain some areas of weather. So those interests of weather patterns are mainly around warm fronts and cold fronts, thermic conditions and how to predict these areas. So I'm going to go for a typical day at Devil's Dyke in England. Now, when you're approaching a subject like which site should I fly from, the obvious thing is to think about the wind direction. Now, you can read synoptic charts, you could read a prediction by a weather forecaster, but one of the grey areas which people fail to understand is the predicted wind speed from a forecaster is not going to include the wind speed on the hill. So a typical wind speed on the hill does not account for the elevation of the actual hill, the slope. So at the bottom of the hill there would be no wind, top of the hill there would be more wind. So if a forecaster said it would be 10-15 miles an hour northwest, you may think Devil's Dyke is going to be a suitable place to fly. But the forecaster's not telling you information such as on top of the hill what would be the wind speed. We don't know. And you would be foolish really to accept that a 10 or 15 mile an hour wind is going to be on top of takeoff. Because if you think about it for a moment, if the hill was 2,000 feet higher, then obviously it's going to be windier as you go higher. So at sea level and takeoff, these are two different areas. So you could say Brighton Beach 15 miles an hour. It's not going to be 15 miles an hour at the top of Devil's Dyke, it's most probably going to be 25. Now if you take into consideration the time of the year, if it's winter you're going to have no thermal activity, so you're just going to have true wind. And possibly you could fly there. You could fly up and down at 400 feet above the ridge in a constant stream of 15 mile an hour northwest. But I'm going to be a little bit more pedantic and go for a typical day, say from April to end of September. So if we said April, we may have cold air. Presumably we would have cold air because it's coming from the northwest. And when the sun comes out, that's going to heat the ground. And when the ground is heating up, it won't be at 8 o'clock in the morning that you're probably going to get thermals. It's more likely 10, 10:30, maybe even 11. But thermals will come through. But from 11 till 12, that's when the thermals will come through quite quickly. So if we go back to that 15 mile an hour wind speed, and then you have a thermal, it's going to increase the wind speed. It may be 20, and that would be too much to fly in, because a paraglider, relatively speaking, is a slow moving aircraft. It performs better in light winds. So generally speaking, you should get away from the thoughts of ridge soaring and more about getting into thermals. Thermals are better away from the ridge. Now, if you had, for instance, a cold front come through, you would have, before then, you would have a warm front. Now, when a warm front comes through, you're going to have a couple of things occur. You're going to have areas like the air temperature is increased. We're still in the month of April, let's say, at this point. And the weather patterns would be the surface wind before the warm front approaches would back. So if it was north, it would go northwest. It would go through, and in between that warm front and the next front following, which is a cold front, you would have a little window, a gap. It's not ideally a good idea to fly in this gap. It's better to wait for the cold front to go through. So if we had a cold front go through and the air afterwards, you would see the sky was blue. The temperature, obviously, as the cold front's gone through, is going to reduce the air temperature. Now when the sun comes out, there's a bigger temperature to start with, so thermal activity in April could be quite vicious, to be quite honest, because you've got a massive temperature difference. Now, at Devil's Dyke, for instance, you may find a tractor turning the soil. Now, if he turns it at 8 o'clock in the morning, there's not a lot of thermal release, but if the tractor was turning the soil after midday, the ground's heated up and the thermal can be released. Now, what would that thermal be like after a cold front has gone through and the wind is northwest in the month of April at Devil's Dyke? Well, it's all going to come down to you observing the temperature the night before and the temperature on the day of flying. Now, forecasters don't really go into that. They may cover it and say in the city of London it may drop, and in the outskirts, rural areas, it may go -2, etc. But a couple of areas to be thinking about is the front of Devil's Dyke, the northwest facing slope in the month of April. This is in shadow and there's probably frost on there. So as the sun gets higher during the month of April, it may well, eventually about 12 o'clock, strike that surface of Devil's Dyke, melting the frost that's in the shadow. And the temperature change is starting again, it's now increased. So if you're flying at takeoff and it was 15 and all these conditions, said conditions occurred, the thermals coming through towards you will be like bullet thermals, because the strength in the thermal is stronger at the point where it's releasing, and it's going with the ridge lift of the wind of 15 miles an hour, and the whole episode increases. Could be you may be coming into top land. It's far better to go out the front where the thermals will be coming up at a slower pace, but remember the 15-mile-an-hour wind will cause them to go across the ground quite quickly. If we jumped ahead and we were in the month of August, the surrounding temperature would be much the same, August summer's day in England. The thermal activity wouldn't be very high, but if we take that cold front that's gone through, we would see a bigger, better increase in temperature. We don't want too big an increase in temperature, otherwise the thermals rise too quickly. Now, some people may say, I think that's better if the thermals go up quicker, but you will go up quicker, and if you exit that thermal, you will come down quicker. And if you're going up at, say, 3 meters a second, it's probably at low air time, that's too quick for you. And a better way to approach the sport is to look for thermals away from the ridge. You'll hear me keep saying away from the ridge. The best place to get thermals where you can use them is away from the ridge, because there's less things to hit like the ridge, there's less pilots taking off into your airspace, and you're more relaxed. So thermal activity is, next stage really is how do you actually spot those thermals?